Where is all of humanity's ancient knowledge? Where did it vanish and why? For millennia, humans have sought to gather, preserve, and expand knowledge. But time and circumstance have repeatedly intervened. Across continents and civilizations, monumental libraries were created, filled with the collective wisdom of their age, only to be destroyed, dispersed, or erased. Today, we embark on a journey through the most famous libraries. The world has ever known libraries that once held secrets of civilizations, knowledge of science and medicine, records of political history, philosophical treatises, and literature that may never be recovered. Let us begin with the most legendary of all, the Library of Alexandria. Egypt. The Library of Alexandria, in ancient Egypt, is often remembered as the greatest repository of human knowledge in antiquity. It was founded in the 3rd century BCE during the reign of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, though some evidence suggests that its initial beginnings may have started under Ptolemy I. Soter. Its purpose was audacious, to gather all the knowledge of the known world under one roof. It was intended to be a place where every work from every civilization could be copied, translated, cataloged, and preserved for eternity. The library itself was not just a single building. It was a complex of institutions, including lecture halls, gardens, reading rooms, and storage areas for scrolls. Ancient historians claim that the library held anywhere from 200,000 to 400,000 scrolls, though some exaggeration is possible. The collections were diverse: Greek philosophical treatises, Egyptian religious texts, Babylonian astronomical charts, Indian mathematical manuscripts, Persian medical records, and writings from as far as Mesopotamia and Asia Minor. The librarians actively sought out works. It was common practice to seize texts from ships docking in Alexandria's harbor, copy them, and return the originals. This made Alexandria a hub of intellectual collection unparalleled in history. The intellectual life surrounding the Library of Alexandria was remarkable. Scholars such as Euclid, the father of geometry, worked there. Archimedes' works, possibly copies of his original treatises, were likely part of the collection. Hypatia, one of the few recorded female scholars of antiquity, studied and taught in Alexandria centuries later, in a city still defined by the library's legacy. Scholars not only preserved texts, but also created new knowledge. Innovations in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy were recorded there. The contents of the library went far beyond philosophical and literary works. It contained historical records of pharaohs, dynastic genealogies, and accounts of wars and diplomacy. Medical texts included treatments and herbal remedies from Egypt, India, and Mesopotamia. Astronomical observations were collected from Babylonian tablets and Greek star charts, possibly including early attempts to measure planetary motion with precision. Legal documents, treaties, and economic records were also stored, giving scholars a comprehensive understanding of the governance and administration of multiple civilizations. Some scrolls likely contained lost works of Homer, as well as poetry, drama, and philosophical debates that were never copied elsewhere. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria is not a single event, but a series of incidents over centuries. The first recorded event involves Julius Caesar in 48 BCE during his civil war in Egypt. Caesar set fire to his own ships in the harbor to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. The fire reportedly spread to parts of Alexandria, and contemporary accounts suggest that portions of the library were destroyed. Historians debate the extent of the damage, but even if only a fraction of the collection was lost, thousands of scrolls disappeared that day. Later, during Roman imperial campaigns, Alexandria suffered further damage. In the 3rd century CE, Emperor Aurelian waged war against Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, and the city's northern districts, possibly including library holdings, were destroyed. By this point, the library may have been partially relocated or supplemented with secondary collections. But the scale of the destruction was immense. In 391 CE, with the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, the Serapeum, a temple associated with the library, was destroyed under the orders of Patriarch Theophilus. This event is often seen as the final blow, erasing remaining texts considered pagan or heretical. Scrolls burned in these incidents included works of philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and literature, some unique copies with no surviving duplicates elsewhere. The consequences of this loss were profound. Centuries of accumulated knowledge vanished. Treatises on mathematics, science, and medicine that might have accelerated human progress were lost. Records of earlier civilizations' history, possibly predating written Egyptian records, disappeared. Entire intellectual traditions vanished, leaving gaps in the historical record that scholars still try to reconstruct today. Some historians argue that these losses were accidental fires, invasions, religious zealotry, and neglect. Yet the repeated targeting of centers of knowledge, combined with the systematic destruction across centuries, raises unsettling questions. Was it sheer coincidence, or did some political, religious, or unknown force deliberately erase knowledge to control humanity's understanding of its past? The Library of Pergamum, Turkey. The Library of Pergamum, located in what is now modern-day Turkey, is one of the most significant centers of learning in the ancient world. Established in the 3rd century BCE under King Eumenes II, it arose during a period when Pergamum was emerging as a cultural and intellectual rival to Alexandria. Unlike Alexandria, which relied heavily on papyrus imported from Egypt, Pergamum pioneered the use of parchment, a writing material made from the treated skins of animals. The development of parchment was likely driven by practical necessity, as Egypt occasionally restricted papyrus exports to prevent rivals from amassing competing collections of knowledge. The library itself reportedly contained approximately 200,000 scrolls, a number comparable to Alexandria's holdings, though smaller in scale. These scrolls were organized meticulously. Scholars and librarians categorized works according to subject, region, and author, much like the Alexandrian system. The collection included Greek literature, philosophy, mathematics, scientific treatises, medical texts, and records from neighboring Anatolian civilizations. Unlike Alexandria, which absorbed texts from across the known world, Pergamum was particularly strong in preserving and producing works of Greek thought, especially in philosophy, rhetoric, and the arts. The intellectual environment surrounding the Library of Pergamum was vibrant. Scholars were sponsored by the king and encouraged to write, copy, and study texts. The library also became a political instrument, possessing a vast collection of knowledge enhanced Pergamum's prestige and influence. Its very existence was a statement that Pergamum could rival the cultural dominance of Alexandria. Historians often highlight the rivalry between the two libraries, suggesting that the competition for knowledge played a role in accelerating the creation and preservation of texts. Pergamum's innovation in parchment had lasting consequences. Parchment allowed for longer-lasting documents that could survive heat, moisture, and rough handling far better than papyrus. This technical achievement enabled the storage of texts in ways that were previously impossible, preserving knowledge that might have otherwise been lost. Some scholars argue that the word pergamene, from which the term parchment is derived, refers directly to Pergamum's pioneering role in developing this medium. Despite its achievements, the Library of Pergamum did not survive the centuries intact. The decline of the Pergamum kingdom, internal political upheavals, and Roman expansion led to the dispersal of many of its scrolls. According to historical accounts, some scrolls were moved to Rome, where they were either absorbed into imperial collections or gradually lost over time. The city itself faced a gradual decline. Without a ruling patron, the library's holdings became vulnerable to neglect and decay. The exact contents of the lost Pergamum scrolls are impossible to reconstruct fully, but surviving references provide tantalizing hints. Among the lost works were likely detailed histories of Anatolia, treaties and diplomatic records, medical and pharmacological texts, astronomical and mathematical treatises, and works of rhetoric and philosophy. Some texts may have overlapped with the Alexandrian collection, while others were unique to Pergamum. Reflecting the particular intellectual traditions of the region, the library's decline and eventual loss highlight a recurring theme in the history of knowledge. Even the most carefully curated collections are fragile when political and social circumstances shift. Whereas Alexandria was repeatedly burned and attacked, Pergamum's loss was quieter, but no less devastating. Knowledge that could have shaped medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and literature in ways we cannot imagine was effectively removed from human access. Some historians view Pergamum's loss as accidental, a consequence of political decline and imperial absorption. Others suggest a pattern when combined with the fate of other great libraries: the repeated destruction, dispersal, and disappearance of knowledge across civilizations could imply deliberate targeting of intellectual centers. While the evidence is circumstantial, the pattern is undeniable. Every great repository of knowledge faced vulnerability to human greed, warfare, or neglect. The Library of Pergamum, though overshadowed in popular memory by Alexandria, remains a powerful symbol. It reminds us that knowledge is not only a cultural achievement, but also a delicate treasure. Even with innovations like parchment and carefully maintained collections, the library could not withstand the long arc of political upheaval, imperial ambition, and societal change. The intellectual achievements preserved there may have influenced Roman thought and European learning indirectly, but the majority of Pergamum's texts and the unique insights they contained were irretrievably lost. This loss of Pergamum's library invites reflection on the fragility of human knowledge. In the modern era, we often take information for granted, yet Pergamum serves as a reminder that centuries of accumulated to cumulative wisdom can vanish in the blink of an eye or slowly decay under neglect. The disappearance of such knowledge raises questions. Was this a natural consequence of history? Or are there deliberate forces throughout time seeking to erase human intellectual achievement? The story of Pergamum, like Alexandria, is not merely about scrolls or buildings. It is about human ambition, the pursuit of knowledge, and the vulnerability of civilizations. Its legacy is a warning, even in the face of innovation, organization, and intellectual brilliance. Knowledge must be actively preserved and protected. Pergamum's fate demonstrates that the loss of knowledge is not always spectacular. Sometimes it occurs quietly, leaving a void that future generations can only glimpse through fragments and references. The Library of Celsus, Ephesus, and the Library of Ashurbanipal. Nineveh Library of Celsus, located in the ancient city of Ephesus in modern-day Turkey, was built in the early 2nd century CE, around 117 CE. As a monumental tribute to Tiberius Julius Celsus Polemianus, a Roman senator and consul. Unlike the sprawling and politically ambitious libraries of Alexandria and Pergamum, Celsus was constructed primarily as a civic institution. Yet it became one of the most impressive repositories of knowledge in the Roman world. It was designed not only to house texts, but also to symbolize the intellectual and cultural aspirations of Ephesus, a city that had grown into a vibrant urban and commercial center under Roman influence. The library reportedly contained around 12,000 scrolls, a significant collection for the period, reflecting both the literary and scientific ambitions of the city. Its architecture mirrored its purpose, grand, symmetrical, and designed to impress visitors with the authority and permanence of knowledge. The scrolls themselves included works of Greek philosophy, rhetoric, Roman law, medical treatises, and detailed accounts of local history and administration. Unlike Alexandria or Pergamum, which had acquired their collections over decades of imperial and scholarly effort, The Library of Celsus reflected a concentrated, curated approach, with texts carefully selected to reflect both universal knowledge and the prestige of the city. Scholars visiting Celsus would have encountered texts covering the natural sciences, mathematics, political theory, and literature. Historical documents chronicled events in Asia Minor and beyond, including military campaigns, trade agreements, and civic decrees. Medical texts likely preserve knowledge of local herbal remedies, surgical techniques, and treatments influenced by Greek, Roman, and Near Eastern traditions. The presence of philosophical works meant that debates on ethics, metaphysics, and human behavior were also preserved, making the library a comprehensive intellectual center. Despite its significance, the Library of Celsus did not survive unscathed. In 262 CE, during Gothic invasions in the region, parts of the city of Ephesus were destroyed. While the library may not have been directly targeted, the resulting fires, structural damage, and eventual neglect led to the gradual disappearance of its scrolls. Unlike Alexandria, whose destruction was violent and often recorded in multiple historical sources, Celsus' library suffered a quieter decline. Nevertheless, the impact was no less devastating. Thousands of works, potentially containing unique accounts of Roman administration, local histories, and philosophical treatises, were lost to time. The Library of Celsus demonstrates a recurring theme in the history of human knowledge. Even carefully curated and architecturally impressive repositories are vulnerable to political instability, war, and societal change. Its loss is a reminder that intellectual achievement is fragile, and that preservation depends not only on careful organization, but also on protection from external forces. Turning northward and back in time, the Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, Iraq, presents a very different model of knowledge preservation. Established in the 7th century BCE during the reign of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, this library was one of the earliest systematically organized repositories of written records. Unlike the scroll-based collections of Alexandria or Pergamum, Ashurbanipal's library consisted primarily of over 30,000 clay tablets, inscribed in cuneiform script. Ashurbanipal, an educated and ambitious ruler, actively sought texts from across Mesopotamia. His aim was to collect the entirety of human knowledge known to the Assyrians, Babylonians, Sumerians, and Akkadians. Tablets were gathered from temples, archives, and private collections. These included epic literature, religious texts, administrative records, legal codes, medical treatises, astronomical observations, and mathematical tables. Among the most famous surviving texts is the Epic of Gilgamesh, an ancient narrative exploring themes of mortality, friendship, and human ambition. The Ashurbanipal library was organized meticulously. Tablets were cataloged according to subject matter, with sections dedicated to divination, medicine, astronomy, literature, and correspondence. Scholars working in Nineveh would have used these texts for practical purposes, administering the empire, predicting celestial events, treating diseases, and for intellectual exploration, studying the wisdom of past civilizations. The library thus served both administrative and scholarly purposes, a model of how centralized knowledge could serve a powerful empire. The destruction of the Library of Ashurbanipal occurred in 612 BCE, when Nineveh fell to a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians. The city was burned, and many of the clay tablets were shattered or buried under rubble. Unlike the flammable papyrus of later libraries, clay tablets were remarkably durable, and modern archaeologists have excavated thousands of them, providing unprecedented insight into Mesopotamian civilization. However, the sheer scale of the original collection means that much of the knowledge Ashurbanipal preserved remains lost. Countless texts detailing astronomical observations, medical techniques, political strategies, and literary compositions were irretrievably destroyed. The Ashurbanipal library highlights the vulnerabilities inherent even in highly organized knowledge repositories. Despite the durability of its medium and the diligence of its collection, the library could not survive the collapse of the political and military structures that sustained it. Its destruction was catastrophic for the transmission of knowledge in the ancient Near East, and its story underscores the broader pattern observed throughout human history: the systematic loss of knowledge due to war, conquest, and societal upheaval. Both the Library of Celsus and the Library of Ashurbanipal illustrate contrasting approaches to knowledge preservation, one based on scrolls and urban prestige, the other on clay tablets and administrative rigor. Yet both succumb to forces beyond their control, highlighting the fragility of human intellectual achievement. When viewed alongside Alexandria and Pergamum, a pattern emerges: the most advanced centers of knowledge in the ancient world, regardless of medium or method, were repeatedly destroyed or dispersed, leaving gaps in history that may never be fully reconstructed. The losses represented by these libraries are not merely about the physical scrolls or tablets. They represent missing insights into science, mathematics, philosophy, medicine, politics, literature, and culture. Every destroyed library removed unique knowledge from the collective human memory, creating a silence in the historical record. Whether due to invasion, fire, neglect, or deliberate erasure, these gaps have shaped the trajectory of human civilization, forcing later generations to reconstruct knowledge with fragments and second-hand accounts. This juxtaposition of Celsus and Ashurbanipal raises a question that will recur throughout the history of lost knowledge. Are these repeated losses merely the result of historical misfortune, or is there evidence of deliberate suppression? The recurrence of catastrophic losses at the most prominent centers of learning invites speculation. Perhaps the repeated disappearance of human knowledge across continents and centuries was a coincidence, a tragic byproduct of the fragility of civilizations. Yet the scale, frequency, and timing of these events suggest a possibility that some forces, political, religious, or otherwise, actively contributed to the erasure of knowledge. After examining the fates of Celsus and Ashurbanipal, the story of human knowledge leads us once again to Alexandria, to the Serapeum, a second and equally significant repository of ancient wisdom. Unlike the Great Library of Alexandria, which functioned as a central hub for the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Serapeum served as both a temple and a library. Established during the Hellenistic period, the Serapeum was dedicated to Serapis, a syncretic deity combining elements of Egyptian and Greek religious traditions. Within its halls, scholars preserved tens of thousands of scrolls covering a wide array of disciplines. Philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and religious texts were housed here, much like in the Great Library. But the Serapeum also contained copies of works that may have been lost elsewhere. The Serapeum's importance extended beyond its role as a library. It was a center of intellectual inquiry and a sanctuary for scholars. The institution attracted philosophers, mathematicians, astronomers, and religious thinkers who studied, debated, and taught in its halls. Its scrolls contained records that offered insights into the political, religious, and cultural life of the Mediterranean world. Administrative records, scientific observations, detailed accounts of rituals, and literary works were preserved alongside sacred texts. Tragically, the Serapeum met a violent end in 391 CE under the orders of Patriarch Theophilus. Christian forces targeted pagan temples in Alexandria, including the Serapeum. The destruction was deliberate and systematic. Scrolls were burned, statues demolished, and temples razed. This act erased another vast collection of ancient wisdom, including works that had survived the earlier destruction of the Great Library. The loss of the Serapeum represents one of the most dramatic instances of religiously motivated eradication of knowledge in the ancient world. The texts destroyed may have contained unique treatises on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Knowledge that could have dramatically altered the course of later scientific and intellectual development. Moving eastward across the continent, we arrive at Nalanda University in India, one of the most impressive educational institutions of the ancient and medieval world. Founded during the Gupta period, around the 5th century CE, Nalanda became a center of learning that attracted students and scholars from across Asia, including Tibet, China, Korea, and Central Asia. Its library, known as Dharmaganj, or Mountain of Knowledge, reportedly contained over 9 million manuscripts. The collection encompassed Buddhist philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, political science, and more. Nalanda was not merely a library, but a university in the full sense. Students studied, teachers lectured, and texts were meticulously copied, preserved, and interpreted. Nalanda's library was organized in multiple large buildings, each containing thousands of manuscripts. Palm leaf manuscripts were the primary medium, supplemented by carefully transcribed texts on birch bark. Scholars meticulously cataloged the contents, ensuring the knowledge was accessible for both teaching and research. Texts from India's earlier intellectual traditions, as well as translations of Chinese and Central Asian works, were preserved, creating a repository of global knowledge unprecedented for its time. The destruction of Nalanda occurred in 1193 CE, when Bakhtiar Khilji invaded the region. According to historical accounts, the library was set ablaze, and the flames burned for months, consuming countless manuscripts. The destruction was total, obliterating works accumulated over centuries. Among the lost knowledge were advanced treatises on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and literature. Rare commentaries and primary texts on Buddhist and Hindu thought, as well as observations of natural sciences, were lost forever. The loss of Nalanda represents one of the most catastrophic events in the history of knowledge preservation, leaving gaps that scholars are still trying to reconstruct from surviving fragments. Finally, we arrive at the Library of Constantinople, the intellectual heart of the Byzantine Empire, founded around the 4th century CE under Emperor Constantine. This library became one of the most significant repositories of Greek, Roman, and early Christian texts in the medieval world. The library's collection included philosophical works, literary compositions, theological treatises, historical chronicles, and scientific writings, covering centuries of accumulated knowledge. It served as a bridge between the classical world and the Middle Ages, preserving texts that would otherwise have vanished. The Library of Constantinople faced repeated disasters over its long history. In 1204 CE, during the Fourth Crusade, the city was sacked, and many manuscripts were stolen, destroyed, or dispersed. This act not only devastated the library's collection, but also scattered texts across Western Europe, contributing to the patchy survival of Byzantine knowledge. Later, in 1453 CE, the fall of Constantinople to Ottoman forces led to further losses. Manuscripts were destroyed, dispersed, or hidden, leaving a fraction of the original collection intact. Among the lost works were writings of classical Greek philosophers, Roman historians, early scientific treatises, legal codes, and theological texts. The destruction of Constantinople's library represents a tragic culmination of the repeated erasure of knowledge that had begun millennia earlier in Alexandria and continued across continents. The patterns that emerge from the Serapeum, Nalanda, and Constantinople are striking. In each case, vast collections of human knowledge were destroyed, often deliberately, leaving gaps in the historical record that can never be filled. The Serapeum's destruction was motivated by religious zeal, Nalanda's by military conquest, Constantinople's by political and military upheaval. In each case, knowledge accumulated over centuries was eradicated, and the intellectual heritage of entire civilizations was lost. The implications of these losses are profound. The destruction of these libraries did more than erase individual texts. It disrupted the transmission of knowledge across generations. Scientific advancements were delayed, philosophical traditions were interrupted, and historical understanding was fractured. The repetition of such catastrophic losses raises a critical question. Were these events merely unfortunate coincidences? Or were they part of a deliberate pattern of erasure designed to prevent humanity from retaining its accumulated wisdom? When considering the fates of the Serapeum, Nalanda, and Constantinople alongside Alexandria, Pergamum, Celsus, and Ashurbanipal, a disturbing picture emerges. Across continents and millennia, the most significant repositories of knowledge, carefully built, curated, and preserved, were repeatedly destroyed. In some cases, destruction was violent and intentional. In others, it was slow and cumulative. The result is the same. Humanity has been denied access to the full breadth of its own intellectual heritage. The losses of these libraries represent a silent war on knowledge, one whose effects continue to resonate to this day. Scholars piece together fragments from surviving texts, citations, and other works, and archaeological evidence, but much of what was once known is irretrievably lost. The question remains, are these repeated losses merely historical accidents? Or is there a deliberate, almost invisible force acting across time to erase the record of human achievement? The story of these libraries, from the Serapeum in Alexandria to Nalanda in India and the Library of Constantinople, serves as both a testament to human intellectual ambition and a warning about its fragility. Each library was a beacon of knowledge, a repository of culture, science, and philosophy. Yet all were vulnerable to forces beyond the control of the scholars who created them. In every case, centuries of accumulated wisdom disappeared, leaving modern civilization to reconstruct history from fragments, often centuries after the fact. Across the span of history, humanity has repeatedly sought to gather, preserve, and expand knowledge. From the clay tablets of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh to the monumental scrolls of Alexandria, from the carefully curated halls of Pergamum and Celsus to the scholarly libraries of Nalanda and Constantinople, each civilization attempted to capture the breadth of human understanding. These repositories were more than mere collections of texts. They were the embodiments of intellectual ambition, cultural identity, and the desire to understand the world. Yet, across time and geography, these centers of learning met a common fate. Alexandria, the first and most famous, saw its scrolls burned during wars, invasions, and religious upheaval. Pergamum, despite its innovation with parchment, gradually lost its collection due to political decline and absorption into larger empires. Celsus, carefully curated and architecturally impressive, succumbed to natural disaster and the chaos of invasions. Ashurbanipal's library, organized and durable, could not survive the destruction of Nineveh. The Serapeum was deliberately destroyed as part of religious purges. Nalanda, with millions of manuscripts, burned for months at the hands of invaders. Constantinople, the last great bastion of Byzantine knowledge, faced repeated sackings and political upheaval, scattering and destroying thousands of irreplaceable texts. When viewed collectively, the destruction of these libraries raises profound questions. Were these events mere coincidences, the natural consequences of war, neglect, and disaster? Or is there evidence of a deliberate pattern, a systemic erasure of human knowledge across time and space? The frequency, scale, and timing of these losses suggest that while accidents certainly played a role, deliberate targeting of knowledge cannot be ruled out. In many cases, knowledge was destroyed precisely when it held power, threatened prevailing authorities, or conflicted with dominant religious or political ideologies. The contents of these lost libraries are difficult to quantify fully. We know that they included scientific and mathematical knowledge, advanced treatises on geometry, astronomy, medicine, and engineering, observations of celestial bodies, calculations of planetary motion. And early theories of physics may have existed in multiple libraries and were lost forever. Philosophical works, treatises on ethics, metaphysics, governance, and human nature that could have influenced the development of Western and Eastern thought were destroyed. Many philosophical schools and debates were lost entirely. Historical records, chronicles of empires, records of wars, diplomacy, and trade were erased, leaving gaps in our understanding of ancient civilizations. Entire dynasties, regional histories, and cultural achievements vanished. Religious and cultural texts, scripts, rituals, and literary works reflecting the beliefs, practices, and artistry of civilizations across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe disappeared, depriving future generations of a full understanding of their heritage. The cumulative effect of these losses has shaped the course of human civilization. Knowledge that could have accelerated scientific development, advanced medicine, or provided insight into human history was removed from collective memory. Later societies had to rediscover or reconstruct these ideas, often centuries after they were first conceived. This repeated erasure invites reflection on the fragility of human knowledge. Civilization invests vast effort into creating, copying, and cataloging knowledge, yet it is astonishingly vulnerable to political, religious, and social forces. The story of these libraries demonstrates that knowledge is only as enduring as the society that protects it. When political power, ideology, or warfare targets centers of learning, humanity itself is diminished, and yet there is a paradoxical resilience. While countless scrolls, tablets, and manuscripts were destroyed, fragments survived. Copies made elsewhere, marginal notes preserved by students, citations in other works, and later translations have allowed some knowledge to persist. The human desire to learn, record, and transmit wisdom cannot be entirely extinguished, even when entire libraries are obliterated. So what can we conclude from this history? Are these losses purely coincidental, the unfortunate outcomes of human conflict and natural disasters? Or is there a deliberate force, a conscious effort across centuries, seeking to erase humanity's intellectual heritage to keep knowledge beyond reach? The evidence is suggestive but inconclusive. What is certain, however, is that the recurring pattern of destruction has left the world with profound gaps in understanding the collective knowledge of ancient civilizations. Once centralized in these monumental libraries, now exists only in fragments, conjectures, and the imagination of historians. As we reflect on this history, it is impossible not to feel a sense of loss and curiosity. What might humanity have achieved had these libraries survived intact? What scientific, philosophical, and cultural breakthroughs were erased before they could influence later generations? These questions may never be answered, yet they continue to inspire inquiry and discovery. The story of the lost libraries. From Alexandria to Pergamum, Celsus, Ashurbanipal, the Serapeum, Nalanda, and Constantinople serves as a warning and a lesson. Knowledge is precious, fragile, and often imperiled by forces beyond the control of scholars. Protecting it requires vigilance, care, and a recognition of its value not merely as information, but as the foundation of civilization itself. Whether these repeated losses were accidental or deliberate, the fact remains, humanity has been deprived of knowledge accumulated over millennia. What survives is only a fraction of what once was, leaving us with an incomplete, tantalizing view of the intellectual and cultural achievements of our ancestors. As you consider this history, reflect on the pattern of lost knowledge and its implications. Perhaps the erasure of these libraries is a warning about the fragility of human achievement. Perhaps it is a deliberate act by unseen forces seeking to control knowledge. Or perhaps it is simply the tragic consequence of history's inexorable march. Regardless, the story of these libraries demands our attention. It challenges us to value, preserve, and protect knowledge in all its forms. It reminds us that the pursuit of learning is a sacred endeavor, one that must be safeguarded against destruction, neglect, and the forces that would seek to erase it in the end. The legacy of these libraries is both inspiring and cautionary. They represent the pinnacle of human intellectual ambition and the tragic consequences of its loss. Their memory serves as a reminder. The preservation of knowledge is not just an academic pursuit, but a responsibility for all of humanity.